Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session hosted by Lux Research about the future of the oil and gas industry. My name is Ronil Dalia, and joining me here today are three of my colleagues in the energy department of Lux Research, Harshit Sharma, Tim Gretak, and Max Halleck. And together we will discuss the oil and gas industry and more specifically about the evolution of the industry. But before we begin, let me briefly introduce Lux Research. Lux is the leading provider of tech-enabled research and advisory solutions, helping clients drive growth through technology innovation. Lux provides expert curation of data developed by advanced analytics and knowledge from our in-house technology experts to identify key market trends and indicators and telling you what you should be doing about them. Now, let me explain why we're having this session in the first place. Everybody knows how the oil and gas industry operates. The strategy of an oil and gas company has pretty much remained the same over the years. It's about extracting crude oil and gas and selling energy to customers. And these companies make a lot of money doing just that. In 2018, the oil and gas industry as a whole was estimated to be a $9 trillion industry. But today we hear a lot about how this should change, that oil and gas companies cannot continue as they have over the past decades. Now, we are not here today to discuss whether oil and gas companies are right or wrong. People across the industry hold a range of opinions, but whether or not you think these concerns or these warnings are being blown out of proportion, it is making the oil and gas industry think about its future. And for some companies, that future is looking drastically different. For example, the director of gas and new energies at Shell thinks that the future of an oil and gas company is not oil, but rather electricity. He believes that Shell will become the world's largest power company in 2030. And then you have some people who prefer to adopt a more cautious approach, like the CEO of BP, who recently said that no options, whether it's oil, electricity, or biofuels, should be discounted yet. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you also have people who think that oil is here to stay, like the CEO of Saudi Aramco, for example. So you can see the different views that are coming from the oil and gas industry today, and it all revolves around this concept, peak oil. When will we reach a point where oil demand starts to decline? 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? Well, we don't know the answer to that, and honestly, neither do these people. And yet, while no one can predict the future, you can still prepare for it. And last year, Shell published the Sky Scenario and gave a snapshot of what the future of the energy sector may look like in 100 years. Now, we are not here to endorse Shell's scenario. We are merely using it as the basis for this discussion today. So assuming this is the future of energy, assuming peak oil really happens in 2025, then what should oil and gas companies do? This is what we're here to discuss today, and for that we brought in three experts that will present what they believe the future of an oil and gas company should be. Each one will tell you what strategy oil and gas companies should adopt, what are the most important technologies or opportunities that these companies should focus on, and how to overcome the challenges that they believe will come up. Harshit Sharma will tell you why oil companies should double down on oil. Tim Gretak will speak about developing a portfolio of energy options, while Max Halleck will tell us why he thinks electricity is the future of the oil and gas industry. And each expert will have 8 minutes to present their case. So Harshit, let's start with you. Tell us what you think the future of oil and gas is.
Yeah, thank you, Renil, for that very nice introduction and also a presentation. Now, our discussion on the future of oil and gas is truly critical, because whatever decision oil and gas companies take moving forward is going to impact the entire energy system. And it doesn't matter if you're an oil company, power company, or a service provider, everybody gets affected. Now, I'm here to present my arguments that the best strategy for oil companies moving forward is to still keep producing oil. But before I do that, I'm sure our listeners are probably wondering, this statement truly sounds bizarre. I mean, in this era of electrification, renewable energy, decarbonization, for someone to come out there and say oil companies should still keep producing fossil fuels just doesn't sound right. And why is that? Because there's a certain perception being created on oil and gas today. There are people out there, famous industry leaders with Twitter accounts, who are consistently talking about this industry, creating a negative perception around it. Are they trying to solve climate change? No, probably not. They're just trying to drive their own business via this propaganda. So here's an example of what I'm talking about, right? Now, Mr. Elon Musk, who's the CEO of Tesla, has never worked in the oil and gas industry, will probably never work in this industry, but he loves to comment about the oil and gas business. Now, he likes to say, why should we risk life on earth for oil? We'll finish it one day anyway. Now, I mean, as funny as this statement sounds, I can ask him, why should we risk life on earth for lithium? We'll finish it one day anyway. Point is, one cannot get swayed or listen to these kind of meaningless comments from people like Elon, or even my colleagues Tim and Max for that matter. There's plenty of business to be done in the oil and gas industry sustainably if oil companies stick to hydrocarbons. So let's move on from this discussion on Elon and let's talk about some facts and numbers. Now, first and foremost, from the outset, I agree that the demand for fuels is going to drop. Whether it's because of better engine efficiencies, electrification, it doesn't matter. The demand for diesel, gasoline will drop. But that does not mean that the demand for oil will drop. And the reason for that is petrochemicals. Because petrochemicals as an entire industry is growing at 3.6% annually. That's 3 times the growth rate of the entire energy system, and actually even faster than global GDP. So as part of the strategy, oil companies will transition their products from fuels to chemicals. And if they play this right, by 2040, they're looking at a combined market size of $5 trillion. Because no matter what we say, at the end of the day, oil companies will still provide fuel to the aviation sector, shipping sector, and even the passenger vehicle market. And the best part about this strategy is that there's absolutely no risk involved here. I mean, I'm asking oil companies to stick to the business they actually created. But there's a reason why the world's biggest companies by revenue are Saudi Aramco, ExxonMobil, Shell, and clearly dwarfing people like Microsoft, because oil makes money. Now, of course, any strategy, good or bad, requires its tools and technologies for deployment. And of course, the hydrocarbon strategy will also require a set of technologies. Now, on this figure, you can see the Lux Tech Radar that shows a portfolio of technologies oil companies will need to master for the strategy. Now, in case you haven't noticed, all these technologies have been built, commercialized, and developed by oil companies for the businesses today. So if they stick to the hydrocarbon strategy, all the technologies they need are already there. And things like carbon capture, methane detection will ensure oil and gas companies can produce fossil fuels sustainably. But of course, it doesn't mean all the work here is done. If there's one technology that oil companies will have to master, it's going to be crude to chemicals. Now, crude to chemicals is, of course, a process, a combination of several technologies, and that's why it doesn't feature on this tech radar. But it's critical for this strategy. And why? Because refineries don't produce chemicals. So what exactly is crude to chemicals? Well, we like to define C2C as a refinery process that produces at least 40% of chemicals per barrel of oil. Via crude to chemicals, oil companies no longer produce gasoline or diesel, but produce ethylene, propylene, benzene, toluene for that matter. And what's interesting around C2C is that the pioneers for this process are actually ExxonMobil and Saudi Aramco, but the main investments here are happening in China. As a matter of fact, in 2018 alone, over $60 billion were committed to crude to chemical projects. And that gives us an idea as where exactly the oil industry is actually headed. But just to drive this point further, let's talk about one of the peers of the oil and gas industry. Let's talk about Saudi Aramco, what exactly they're doing. So in 2018, they signed a $40 million agreement with Chevron Lummus and Maxens to further optimize the crude chemical process. By 2020, Saudi Aramco will produce at least 80% chemicals per barrel of oil. And furthermore, they'll completely eliminate the steam cracker. Now, why am I saying this? Am I trying to imply Saudi Aramco is the leader here and there's absolutely nothing else oil companies can do? Well, absolutely not. There's plenty of opportunity in crude to chemicals for all oil and gas companies. For example, you can partner with Saudi Aramco. That's what JX Nippon is doing in building their FCC units. You could license it, case in point, Indian Oil, and of course, you can have your own competing process. ExxonMobil already does, and even other oil companies like Shell chemical players like BASF have their own IP around crude to chemicals. Crude to chemicals is not about reinventing the wheel. It's about taking an existing technology and bringing it to scale. And that brings me to the challenges of this strategy. And again, any strategy, good or bad, will have its challenges. Now, when it comes to crude to chemical projects, oil companies will no longer be able to produce jet fuel and support the aviation sector. If they do act on crude to chemicals, they'll only have to use light or medium crude. And if they have big assets of heavy oil, it's going to be a problem. And then lastly, all crude to chemical projects work on hydrotreatment, hydrodesulfurization. So hydrogen supply will be a problem. Once again, the beauty of the hydrocarbon strategy is that almost all these challenges can be solved with solutions right out there. For example, oil companies moving forward will need to be a lot more strategic. If you're building a project, say in India, where both fuels and chemicals are growing, build maybe an integrated complex. If you're going to China, C2C might be the answer. When it comes to finding the right kind of crude, there is technology out there. You can look into microsieves, quantum sensors, find the right quality crude you want. And when it comes to hydrogen, oil companies will control natural gas. They'll produce hydrogen in the world. But even then, if you require more hydrogen, look towards green hydrogen, water electrolysis. So while you wonder about the challenges and solutions of this hydrocarbon strategy, I've actually come to the end of my presentation. And of course, my biggest message is oil is here to stay. Please don't focus on the meaningless discussions that go around this industry. But with that said, let me give 3 fundamental takeaways. First and foremost, if oil companies stick to hydrocarbons, there are no sunk costs for them. The trillions of dollars in the E&P business, midstream business, refining business will be used in this strategy. If they act on this strategy, all the existing refineries can be retrofit for chemicals. They don't need to wait for electric vehicles to become cost competitive, solar prices to come down. If they want to act on the strategy, they can act today. And then lastly, if oil companies stick to hydrocarbons, their fundamental business model, ecosystem, customers, everything remains the same, and they continue to be a money-making machine. So with that said, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I now pass the ball to my colleague, Tim.
Thank you, Harshit, for that predictable analysis. I'm sure our clients are glad that Lux is still producing such out-of-the-box thought leadership. I'm Tim Graytak, analyst leading Lux's energy storage research, and I'm here to discuss why a forward-thinking fuel strategy is the best strategy for oil and gas companies. Now, if you're going to quote a Tesla, at least choose the right one. Dispense with the necessity of mining, pumping, transporting, and burning fuel, and so do away with the innumerable causes of sinful waste. It might not fit on a tweet, but Nikola Tesla laid the groundwork over 100 years ago for a future that we're only just now bringing about, the future of fuels. The fuel strategy continues to focus on the primary driver of the oil and gas business today, fuels for transportation, but with a twist. Diversify that fuels portfolio to include electricity and hydrogen for future electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles. This insulates the oil industry from any reductions in hydrocarbon fuel sales, and better yet, introduces higher value fuels in electricity and hydrogen. These alternatives might only be 30% of fuel volumes in 2050 under Shell's Sky scenario, but will constitute over 40% of the $3.5 trillion fuels revenue opportunity. Furthermore, the oil and gas industry keeps its key customer, the transportation sector. Nothing today or in the future affords the same convenience as a car, which is why, shared or not, it remains the center of mobility solutions. Utilities or automakers might try to muscle in to control mobility, but fuels are the oil industry's domain, and with this strategy, will remain its domain. The technologies to watch on our tech radar to succeed in this strategy might look a little different from typical oil and gas technologies, since they're centered around the lithium-ion battery. But remember, Exxon helped invent the lithium-ion battery back in the 1970s. I'm not recommending that every company run off to become battery materials developers, but understanding these materials will become crucial to the core technology I want to discuss, battery fast charging. Battery fast charging uses high-powered DC equipment to recharge an electric vehicle fully in less than 20 minutes. These fast charging systems are used to rapidly refuel electric vehicles on long-range road trips, and more importantly, provide the crucial infrastructure that makes EVs a direct competitor to internal combustion engines. While these fast chargers themselves are just cabinets and cables and power electronics, successful and safe fast charging requires considerable battery pack design and battery chemistry considerations to accommodate such high power levels. Considerations that fast charging network operators can inform and direct. Fast charging builds a virtuous cycle. Data from fast charging networks can inform battery developments that accommodate greater fast charging capability, leading to increased reliance on that fast charging network. This can move oil and gas companies from the sidelines to the heart of the global effort to develop high power, high energy batteries, itself a $36 billion business today. Again, that doesn't mean that oil and gas companies will become battery manufacturers. Instead, they will install, own, operate, and profit from fast charging stations by selling EV owners who stop at fast charging stations additional miles of range quickly. While Tesla operates its supercharger network at a loss, because that's what all Silicon Valley businesses do apparently, a future retail fast charging station doesn't have to. In addition to buying EV range from a fast charging network provider, customers can purchase higher margin consumables with their extra 10 minutes at each station to bolster a typically low margin retail fuel business. If you equip fast chargers with solar and integrated battery energy storage, that additional infrastructure can provide services to the power grid when not charging EVs. This means additional profit on top of the $2 billion per year one can make from operating fast charging stations alone. Shell is just one example of companies trying to get into this space quickly. They partnered with fast charging company Aligo in 2017, and together the two will build and operate fast charging stations at Shell retail fuel stations in the UK and Netherlands. This couples Shell's brand with EV services early in a field where customers currently have few options beyond Tesla. Furthermore, Shell is no longer losing sales as customers adopt EVs. Instead, they're serving a vital role servicing that future vehicle fleet. This presents one of the first challenges of the EV fast charging strategy: first mover advantage. Tesla has built out a big network early, but Tesla already has done its competitors a favor and adopted a plug standard different than all other automakers. We still have GM and Volkswagen and now Toyota and many other automakers that oil and gas companies can target and service. It's also true that most EV charging will be done at home, making fast charging only occasionally needed. There's also opportunity in this space for home EV chargers, especially ones that can respond to grid conditions for cheaper electricity or even provide grid services. There's also concerns that 10 to 15 minutes still isn't fast enough, especially in urban center refueling stations. Well, how does 3 minutes sound? Battery swap can refuel 3 times faster than fast charging and improve customer throughput in high traffic environments. This is why a fuel strategy is the best strategy for an oil and gas company. Fuel efficiency improvements driven by regulation will outpace new vehicle adoption globally, leading to a slowdown, if not a peak, in fuels demand, independent of EV adoption. Better to diversify early and benefit from EV growth and move into higher value fuels like electricity and hydrogen. Focusing on fast charging will quickly bring oil and gas companies to the technological forefront in lithium-ion batteries without ever building a business around them. Understanding when and how fast charging occurs is very valuable data for automakers and cell manufacturers. And oil and gas companies can own that data, as well as the familiarity and know-how to make fast charging better. And finally, fuels are just a foothold to a broader line of business. The oil industry can move into grid services with electricity refueling and can even move into chemicals with hydrogen refueling. Energy companies can finally be true energy companies and not limit themselves to just hydrocarbons. While my fuel strategy is far superior to Harshit's do-nothing strategy, it's not the only one looking to move beyond hydrocarbons. For more on that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Max Halleck.
Thank you, Tim, for that introduction and for your interesting contribution to this discussion. Now, before I dig into the strategy I'm proposing, I think it's likely that Elon Musk would not take criticism lying down, so let's give him the chance to defend himself. Here, Elon points to the fact that it doesn't have to just be about choosing societal good or avoiding waste. I will be presenting a strategy that is not just in line with sustainability goals and emission standards. This is a profitable strategy, one which sets up an oil and gas company for long-term growth, a fundamentally logical and reasonable path. The future is electric. Now, the demand for hydrocarbons will increase for at least a little while longer. I won't argue with anyone about that, but electricity will displace hydrocarbons as the main energy carrier. My colleagues have encouraged you to focus in on relatively limited applications for whatever reason, feedstocks, vehicles, but you can't afford to ignore the role that electricity will play. An oil and gas company today has become accustomed to extracting, refining, and distributing hydrocarbons. To adapt to an electrified future, your strategy can look very similar. E&P is investment in generation assets. Your pipelines become electrical grid infrastructure. You're still acting as an energy supplier, and you don't have to retreat to fuels or chemicals. This is necessary to future-proof your strategy. Electricity from renewables is the cheapest source of electricity today, and all around you sectors are electrifying, from vehicles to heating. Electricity has become a superior energy carrier, and this leaves fuels fewer and fewer places to go. The current market for just electricity retail represents a multiple trillion-dollar opportunity, and that's just one piece of the electrified future. Now, what are the technologies I mean to be specific about these market opportunities that I'm highlighting within electrification? There are numerous entry points into the electrical future, ranging from developing high-voltage transmission infrastructure projects to investing in next-generation solar technologies, and these represent a range of near-term versus long-term opportunities. One is probably unsurprising. Many oil and gas players have already pounced on the opportunity of offshore wind turbines for the obvious synergies with developing offshore platforms. But I want to talk to you about one that is less well understood as a clear opportunity for oil and gas, but still valuable. Let's talk about rural electrification. Well, what do I mean about this? What is the actual strategy here? Tapping the rural electrification opportunity means acting as the power provider in the developing world, either through selling solar home systems, tens of watt scale, pay-as-you-go solar and battery systems sold for individual homes, or developing larger solar plus storage microgrids. This strategy can include elements of both infrastructure development or retail, depending on the stage of electrification of the community. Why is it valuable to you? Well, congratulations, you've just found the demographic that shows promising long-term electricity demand growth, and which is also dramatically underserved by local utilities. The strategy of existing providers in this space, particularly those selling solar home systems, is to create a sort of energy demand feedback loop, offering DC appliances powered by solar home systems, then eventually offering larger solar home systems to serve larger appliances such as DC televisions. With ongoing reductions to the price of PV modules and energy storage, this business model is expanding very quickly in Uganda, Tanzania, Bangladesh, many other regions. Those three solar home system developers that I highlight together represent about 1 million households reached, about 5 million people. And best of all, the main barrier in this space is just financing. The technologies are well understood. This is not a technology problem, and if oil and gas is better at anything than extraction, it is financing. Now, let's try to make the opportunity a bit more tangible. ENGIE acquired Phoenix International, a solar home system developer in sub-Saharan Africa, in the middle of last year. Phoenix wants to advance through not just proliferation, but growth of demand. They are looking to increase the number of customers they reach, and that's been aided by the acquisition by ENGIE, but most importantly, grow the demand of those customers through that demand feedback loop that I mentioned before. When you consider a developing world consumer that scales up consumption from 100 kilowatt hours per year to 2,000 kilowatt hours per year, which is still less than many regions around the world, the market size scales up into the hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, I suppose we should at least try to deflate the prospects of this strategy. Let's try to find challenges, but I think you'll see there's not much need for concern. The first thing to watch out for in this space is that utilities are the main players for developing off-grid power and will be your main competitors. Well, the utility problem, as I'm sure most utilities will themselves attest, they move very slowly. And more importantly, oil and gas has money. You have the capability to step in and make major investments. You really also should be careful about the fact that in this undertaking, you'll likely be responsible for the maintenance of a multitude of remote assets. But managing remote assets, this is something that you do already as an oil and gas player. You have experience in managing remote systems, and these systems are already part of an increasingly sophisticated IoT and communications network, one which is already being developed by the players in the space. And then third, it's important to note that the current cost barrier for deploying remote power solutions is the cost of storage. Well, lithium-ion batteries are falling in cost with or without you, and startups are also doing clever things to create revenue streams, such as allowing owners of solar home systems to buy and sell electricity from each other, or even link communities together into the national grid to provide ancillary services. This is reducing cost barriers and making off-grid power more and more accessible. So, I want you to remember three things. First and most importantly, think bigger than hydrocarbons and act for the future. The future is electrified, whether that demand comes from vehicles becoming electric, heating becoming electric. Fuels are running out of places to go for energy, but I don't have to convince you of this. You know that you need to be ready for that future. So, to be ready, be afraid. Oil and gas is going to need to care about consumers in a big way, and those consumers may decide to not care about you. With consumers having the option of owning their own exploration and production assets, by that I mean solar panels and batteries, those customers may well decide that they don't need you anymore and even get energy from their neighbors. And lastly, remember there's about 800 million people out there who will pay for power and will find a way to get that power, and it might not be from you. But you are well positioned to serve that need and profit from it. Now, thank you, Harshit and Tim, for your contributions to this conversation, and thank you all for your time. Runil, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Max, and thank you and Harshit as well for presenting your arguments. So today we've heard three compelling arguments for how oil and gas companies should evolve in the future. Now, I'm sure the question on everyone's mind is, who is right? And the answer to that is, we don't know. As we said earlier, no one can predict the future, and only time will tell which of these strategies presented today is the winning strategy. Should oil and gas companies do what Harshit said and double down on oil? Should they follow Tim's advice and focus on the transportation sector? Or should they completely transform the business and become power companies like what Max suggested? And we'd like to hear from you. Reach out to us with your thoughts. Tell us whether you agree with any one of our experts or whether you have an entirely different strategy that you think is better. Feel free to email us directly and we will get back to you. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and our blog for more expert insight and content. Thank you everyone for your attention, and thanks again to our presenters, Harshit Sharma, Tim Gretak, and Max Herlich. Have a great day, everyone.